and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/172, and you can email the show pedalshift@pedalshift.net or call the voicemail hotline 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, from Lucca, Italy. This is one of the few times when I've done a remote recording from a country not the United States. I did it once before from here, in fact. Did I? I'm not even sure. I remember that 4 years ago, in the early days of Pedalshiftness, I did a show about bicycling in Italy. It was very much based here in Lucca. I am at the same retreat center that my girlfriend ran the yoga retreat from 4 years ago. We're back here again. I decided to come along for the ride, literally, figuratively, etc., and help a little bit out for the retreat, but mostly kind of check out some of the bikey goodness here in Tuscany once again. The difference between 4 years ago and now is, number one, Pedalshift is a little more established than it was back then. And two, I did not bring a bike with me. The other little bit of tidbit, kind of, I guess we'll call it the third thing, is that I also got a peek at what bicycling was like in Venice. Spoiler alert. There is no bicycling in Venice. I did not realize this, and it made me extra glad that I didn't bring the Brompton along for this. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. The one thing that I wanted to kind of underscore about the show is that I did not do any actual bicycle touring around here. In fact, I didn't see anybody that was, objectively speaking, bike touring at all while I was out here, which if memory serves, I think I saw some folks with panniers who looked like they were doing fully loaded touring 4 years ago. I have not seen anybody yet. The other thing is I'm going to be going to Florence tomorrow as I sit here and record this. So I might have some additional things to talk about with Florence once I am all done recording this, packing it up, shipping it out to you. And so I'll talk about that perhaps on a future episode if there's anything new to add. On this episode, I'll talk a little bit about my experiences, just sort of observing bicycling culture around here, especially also my experiences, because I did some touring, I'll call it touring, looking around and exploring the area by bicycle and my experiences with all of that. But the element of the show that I think, or the thing I learned, maybe I should say, the most this week was how much I think that I'm enjoying cross-training for bicycle touring, because so much of this week has been doing physical activity that I don't get to do enough of in my everyday life, but I think has really benefited me and will benefit my bicycle touring. So I wanted to talk about the benefits of cross-training for bicycle touring as sort of the second part of the show, which we'll be getting to in a little bit. But first off, let's kick it off with the journal. The journal, of course, is the section of the show where we talk about bicycle touring experiences, whether they're yours or mine. And once again, it's mine. And we're going to talk about bicycling around Italy. I wanted to start off by talking about my experience in Venice. And I was really honestly surprised. I did very little research ahead of time about Venice. I'd heard wonderful things about the city. And virtually anybody that I've ever talked to who's gone to Italy says nothing but amazing things about Venice. Venice, of course, is the city that is, it's all on islands. And the areas in Venice are best traveled to by canal or by walking. What I did not realize and didn't know until I got there was, as I was looking around, I was like, there's no bicycles here. There are none. And I eventually got to the point where I found out that bicycles are actually banned on the island of Venice. Now, they're allowed in some of the outer islands like Murano, which is famous for the glass. Also Moonraker, if you're a Bond watcher, it was in there. That was Murano. Murano's another one where bikes were allowed, and a few others as well. So once you get onto the mainland, it's okay as well. But on Venice proper, that island, no-go, which I thought was really interesting. I also kind of understand why. It is, the streets are like any other European city, very narrow, but even more so. Plus Venice, especially this time of year, super touristy, lots of people going on. And the systems that city has just to kind of survive, and when I say survive, I mean just operate. Shops need to get their stuff. So when I was jet lagged on the first morning, I was up very, very early, and which is the opposite of what it should have been, but I was. And the canal was full of boats taking stuff basically to get dropped off in various key points around the city. And then it's not a truck, it's not a bicycle, it's a dude. Almost always a dude. I don't think I saw any women doing this. It's a dude with a cart, a hand truck basically, that does the last mile delivery. So picture any other city that you're in, and last mile delivery is often done by motorized vehicle, truck, or in some special places by bicycle. Well, in Venice, it's all by human powered delivery on two wheels, not a bicycle, a hand truck. And you're going over stairs, over canals, and all sorts of things. It is not efficient at all, but it's really fascinating to see. Given all of that, it totally makes sense that you're not going to want a bicycle because you can't have one in Venice. So if you're considering a European tour and you've got Venice on your list, you're going to have to figure out a way to deal with your bicycle, because while they're certainly banned from riding, I didn't even see them around. So I'm not even sure if you could bring one on the island. Now, I could have perhaps surreptitiously done that with my Brompton, putting it in stealth mode and carrying it around, but what a pain in the butt it would have been. It is just a very difficult city to move around if you're rolling anything. So I just think that it's a city that's best experienced without a bicycle, which I think is one of the few places on the planet that I would say that. Maybe top of Mount Everest is another one, but for a very different reason. Well, maybe the same reason. It's because it's difficult to get a bike around there. Maybe that's it. So anyways, that was my experience in Venice, which was really, really limited amounts of bicycle exposure. And it was so weird as somebody who touches a bicycle at least every day and rides one at least every other day, if not every day. So I thought that was kind of interesting to be away from it for that long. Otherwise, in other parts of Italy and the other towns that I saw, a lot of very utilitarian bikes. And a lot of vintage bikes as well, particularly here in Lucca, but also on the islands of Murano and Burano. I was seeing a lot of vintage bikes and a lot of cruisers because it's all about utility. The thing about the vintage bikes that I thought was kind of interesting is, it isn't like kind of, got to get the latest and greatest bike. Nobody was doing anything on a bike because because they were fancy looking or cool looking or whatever, although they kind of were in their own way. It wasn't around the marketing of different colored bikes and stuff like that. I think that they're very utilitarian around here, and I kind of appreciated that. I rode two cruisers myself. One was a dark green and one was a light baby blue with a light baby blue basket, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So looks aren't a priority. It didn't seem like to me, but functionality definitely was. And you just see the bikes all over the places where they are allowed, and a lot of functionality with all of that. And if you're coming to Italy on a bicycle tour, I think that your experience kind of melding in will be pretty seamless. Just how I notice things around the areas that I've been. And the riding has been very interesting and maybe even a little bit chaotic in some of the cities. Again, very narrow streets, very typical of Europe. But also in Italy, I've noticed it's sort of are you on the left side? Are you on the right side? It sort of doesn't really matter in some of the cities. And things just sort of function and everyone gets out of everyone's way. But it isn't a very kind of strict pass on the left, right on the right kind of situation in a lot of spots. Again, that was just my experience, especially in Lucca. The retreat center that we're at is actually not in Lucca proper. It's up in the hills outside of town. And one of the benefits of that is I got to see a whole lot of really cool looking racing bikes. This is the exception to what I was saying before. These have been very specialized bikes, very nice looking road bikes, and a lot of lycra clad folks attacking the hills out this direction. And it was amazing because it's a real wide array of men and women and age variations. I mean, I saw some folks that I have to think were probably in their 70s and maybe their 80s tackling some fairly steep terrain out this direction, and it really made me feel good to kind of see that, and I think that Tuscany is well known for its hilly terrain and for folks kind of attacking those hills with racing bikes and whatnot. I think it would be difficult but not impossible to do it on a fully loaded touring bike, but I haven't seen anybody. That is probably because, frankly, it's a little warm out here right now. It's tickling with 90 degrees Fahrenheit during most of the heat of the day. In fact, right now I'm kind of retreated inside do this recording during the heat of the day, largely because I don't want to be outside in the heat, although it's pretty easy to escape it when you are in the shade. Now, we're relatively close to the coast. We went to an area called Cinque Terre, which are 5 towns. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But that area on the coast is much cooler. So it's sort of like 10 degrees cooler there, 10 degrees cooler here compared to interior Florence and other cities like that. So bicycle touring in that kind of heat, not impossible, but in that kind of terrain, maybe not so hot. So it kind of depends on what you're after. I keep mentioning Lucca, and Lucca is, as I've mentioned, in Tuscany. It has recently been, I think in the New York Times, lauded as, hey, don't go to Florence, go to Lucca, which I think is really interesting because I've only had real Italian experiences here in this town just by virtue of the fact that it's close to the retreat center that we're at. But I really understand why someone would have that take. Now, I haven't been to Florence for very much, so I won't have much to compare it to until I do that. But Florence, if it's anything like any of the larger cities that I've been in, well, it's a larger city. And if you want kind of a little more manageable experience with some really interesting, cool stuff around, well, Lucca is this cool city that has medieval roots, and it's a walled city with a big bike track right on top of it. Basically, it's a multi-use path, but really excellent for bicycling. So, it has a lot of really interesting things. It's got all the amenities that you could possibly want, all packaged in this really very bite-sized town that you can walk all around and through for hours on end and have a different experience each day. So I would definitely recommend, if you're looking at doing something in Italy, Venice was awesome, really great, not so hot for bike touring, but I think Lucca would be an interesting addition to anyone's bike tour if you are going through Italy and don't mind handling a little bit of the terrain that's out there. There's some interesting rivers that are around, and it looks like that there are paths along those, canals as well. I didn't do a ton of research as to what kind of a route could happen around here, but there's definitely, I believe, Eurovelo routes that include Italy as well. So definitely take a look at that, and I've had a wonderful couple of experiences here in Lucca, and I would definitely recommend it if you're thinking about coming up this direction into Tuscany for any part of your European travel on bike. My first bike experience in Lucca on this trip was this really interesting historical tour of the city with the husband of the woman who runs the retreat center here. And he was really interesting, had some really interesting stories. So I want to share some of the audio of that, and also some of my thoughts during that tour. So we're going to break away for a moment here and get a little bit of soundscape of Lucca, Italy during my historical tour by bicycle. So we're riding on the path here, and it's paved with like itty bitty cobblestones. So it's not like a perfectly smooth asphalt as we're used to, but it's very smooth. And we're on these kind of cool cruiser bikes. Path is, almost as wide as the Ohio to Erie Canal with the 2 lanes. So it's really good. Monday morning, pretty crowded, but this is high tourist season. There's like tons of music festivals and stuff like that. But we're getting a tour around the city on the top of the wall, which is this big multi-use path that encircles the city. And I think it's a great way to see Lucca, which is a hidden gem. My second time here, I really enjoy it. But this is my first time I'm able to bring the bike down here. Before I had the Brompton, and the Brompton stayed up in the hills. So really excited to see the town. And Federico is super knowledgeable, and his family goes way back to the silk days and the banking days. So lots of really interesting information.
So Lucca was a republic. So you were coming in Lucca in the morning, you were passing the gate that we just passed, the south gate. You were shown the passport. You were saying, I'm coming to Lucca to bicycle to sell something. What are you selling? You change your money in Lucasian currency. That it was quite important. And then you stay for the day, and then the night you must go. So Lucca, because it was a republic, a small republic, and the 12 family, they were quite controlling what was happening around. Not like today. In the past, they were putting poles with head of people around the town, just to say, you know where you are going. We are controlling you. They were giving you a lot of information about control.
Unfortunately, I missed a story with Federico was telling about how it's this old legend about this woman who made a deal with the devil to appear pretty for the rest of her life. And then when her day was coming, she was trying to turn back the clock on the clock tower by the church, and the devil comes up at the stallions in a chariot flaming from behind saying, "You can't fool me, you can't turn back time and cheat this." And then he takes her and goes into hell through this pond that's right outside of what's now the Botanical Gardens. And families to this day apparently say, "Hey, if you don't do good on your schoolwork, kid, if you don't do good, if you're not a good person, you know where you're going," and they point to that pond. That's awesome. So we just left the East Gate, which apparently faces Florence. Not apparently, it does. And that used to be their big rivals, big enemies. So that wasn't built for a long time. It was never opened until, I guess, things chilled out. So that was kind of an interesting view there. And we also were able to see the medieval wall. So Lucca kept expanding through the years, very slowly as things warranted. Especially the silk trade was part of it. And the Bonaparte family was involved. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. And we just passed the football stadium on our right. Working our way, let's see, counterclockwise as we stay in the States, anti-clockwise as I think they say everywhere else. It's sort of like the metric system of sayings. And we're passing by a whole bunch of people who are on other tours on yellow rented bikes with big signs on them. Ooh.
I had it malfunctioning.
Somebody who is learning how to bicycle on the fly. Very good. Good for her. Awesome.
This is a way to protect your town. You put some small V-shaped hill around, so the enemy, if you want to attack the town, must come up and you see them and you kill them. So that was a typical medieval way to protect the town.
One of the interesting things that I hear a lot here on this trail is so much English. There's a lot of folks who are English speakers, and the one other thing that I've noticed in town is how ubiquitously English is spoken. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're a little worried about not speaking Italian and visiting a town like Lucca, don't worry about that, because if you understand my mashing of the English language, then you'll do just fine here. It's been very welcoming and open. Even though I try the Italian, we quickly go to English because my Italian is, I don't know what the word for lousy is in Italian, but it's that. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of soundscape of the tour there. That was a lot of fun. I certainly learned a lot about big old hellmouths, and on the tour that I ended up doing subsequently, I ended up seeing a lot of that. So was it 2 days later? 2 days after that tour, I came back down to the town and I rented a bicycle, and this was the baby blue with the baby blue basket jobber, and it was great. It was the cheapest bike that was available because I didn't need anything fancy. It's a very flat trail, as I mentioned, and really nicely surfaced. It was just wonderful to ride on. So I was like, I'll take whatever you got, dude. What do you got that's cheap? And for €4 an hour, I rented a bike for 2 hours. It was that baby blue bike, and it was perfectly fine. And I ended up wanting to do a lap or two and then maybe dive into the city. But later on, I got to the point where, you know what? I really needed to bang out some miles. I hadn't ridden more than just that one loop around the city until that point, and I just was aching to do some real mileage and maybe get up to a little bit of speed as well. And of course, doing that on a multi-use path, you got to be mindful of pedestrians and other bicyclists. And as it turned out, other vehicles, there were some motorized vehicles that ended up there servicing the area. And at one point, there was one car up there that I think was trying to do a shortcut and got away with it because there's wide pathways to get up there for bikes and pedestrians, but apparently cars too, and I don't think that they were supposed to be there. Anyways, I ended up doing 7 full loops of Lucca, and it ended up being about 19.1 miles if my ride with GPS was accurate. And it was fantastic. Got to see, took some pictures, especially got another picture of the Hellmouth from that wonderful story, the legend that is told to children, which I think is hysterical. And the riding was really fun and nice. And by the end of it, it was, a little shy of 2 hours because that's how long I had the bike for. But I really felt like I got to know the city just by being able to observe things and look around and passing by the music festival that's going on. I think the next night was Janelle Monáe was playing. And so there were sound checks going on. Sidebar, today, as I record this, I believe the Scorpions are doing their sound check. What a wildly weird and interesting festival. Janelle Monáe and then the Scorpions, and then I guess Sting in a couple weeks or next week. And I think they had Tears for Fears as well. Boy, what a diverse, interesting music festival. But to hear the Scorpions roadies playing, getting things tuned up, I thought that was pretty cool. But as I was riding around, seeing the botanical gardens and all sorts of interesting things. Small city, lots of things going on. And as I've often stated, my belief is that when you see things at bicycle speed, you really can, experience things in a different way. When you're doing it at vehicular speed or train speed, you zoom by it at 60, 70, 80, 100 miles per hour or more. The fast train was pretty fast. So, you're not going to see much. You're not going to experience much. But by going around the city that many times, things got to be pretty familiar to me. It's like, oh, this is by the North Gate. This is by the East Gate. Seeing the same people who were kind of working out or riding themselves or going out for a stroll. It was just kind of interesting from a people watching perspective as well. So I really enjoyed it. This isn't something that I would consider, maybe for me, a bike tour, but I think that by experiencing the place by bicycle and doing those kinds of that kind of mileage, and granted, it was only about 20 miles, which is about a third of a normal day for me. It still felt like I was kind of experiencing it with a bike tourist mentality, which I think actually works kind of nicely. You don't necessarily always have to go on a multi-day bike tour to get that bike touring vibe off of a city. Just spend a day on a bike or a half day on a bike or a quarter day on a bike and go around. Find a way to get lost, find the places. The one thing that I found that I really liked is I used, and I think I featured this on the pod before, app called Maps.me. They're offline maps. They will allow you to do point-by-point directions if you download the map on Wi-Fi before you go out there. And it's been an invaluable resource for me as a pedestrian just getting around town. But also, it was really helpful knowing where I was and situating myself while I was doing these bike rides. I've certainly used it during bike touring times. They're fantastic when you're in areas where you don't get a cell phone signal. So I think they're great. And that app is a fantastic resource out there. So I would definitely recommend that for your next bike tour, especially if you're going to be in a place where you don't think you're going to get a cell phone signal, or you'd like to exist with using less data, as I like to here in Europe, because I have a limited pool of resources. I think I had a 1 gigabyte plan for the entire week. And you post a bunch of photos, you can burn through that pretty quickly. So taking advantage of Wi-Fi while you can and data-free apps to mimic the mapping apps that I use and just sort of slurp away data in the States because I've got a much larger plan. That ended up working out really well for me. So that is it for the journal. And next up, we're going to be moving on to, well, I guess this would be the lab. The lab, of course, is the part of the show where we talk about experimental things, or maybe kind of things that we're learning along the way. And I will have to say that I went into this trip thinking, it's going to be me, a bike. Maybe I'll do some hills, maybe I won't. And that's what I would be talking about on the show. But I wanted to talk about, for at least a few more minutes, about what I've learned on this trip regarding, I guess, fitness and how my fitness relates to bicycle touring using other methods. So basically cross-training. So this is a yoga retreat, and I am not a good yogi at all. I tend to go hot and cold with it. I'll do it for a while, and then I won't touch it for years. And on my girlfriend's birthday at the end of June, she said, "Hey, I'm going to class. Would you like to come with me?" Of course, it was her birthday, so I said, yes. Just say yes on birthdays, people. Whatever. If you got a significant other, a family member, if it's their birthday, whatever it is, just say yes. It's nice. So I did. And I ended up enjoying it, even though I was so very stiff. When you are just bicycling, this may not be a surprise to a lot of you, but for me, and I knew this, but it still was shocking. My flexibility, because all I've been doing is bicycling, is, well, frankly, not there. I used to be able to do, bend, do a forward fold and touch my toes, maybe even get my hands down on the floor, and when I was really into yoga, I was able to do some other things as well. In terms of flexibility demonstrations, there's a pose called staff pose where you're seated up and you bend over and you reach down towards your feet, which are flexed vertically. So, think of them at 90-degree angles. And when I was at my most flexible, I could actually go down, reach around the sides of them and sort of pull down towards my shins. So my hamstrings were much more limber then. Well, bicycling, all you're doing is building up hamstring and quad muscles. And if you don't mix in some way to stretch those things, they're not going to be very flexible. And that was my discovery on this trip, was how inflexible I was. Because after I did that yoga class, I decided, you know what? On this yoga retreat where I didn't intend to do a lot of yoga, I decided that I was going to try to do as much of it as I could. And so this week I've only missed, I think, one class, and that wasn't even a class that was focused very much on flexibility and whatnot. It was a different style of yoga, more of a kind of a relaxing style of yoga. The other classes, I struggled through them, but I will tell you, I was able to get to the point on the class this morning, the final one of the entire week, where I was able to, in that staff pose that I just described, lean down. And I'd been using straps all week to sort of extend my arms essentially and to sort of pull myself in. Now I can actually do that forward fold and grab on at least the tops of my toes so I could grab my toes. Now, I'm a long way off from being able to grab the sides of my feet and really getting down there, but in 1 week's worth of, relatively decent work, I was able to improve my flexibility. And when I was out on the bike yesterday, I noticed it. And I think that one thing that's true about muscles is that the more flexibility you have, it is better for you. So if you're going to be building up muscles by doing a lot of bicycling, it's not a terrible idea to find some way to make those muscles that you build up be as flexible as possible. It's just straight up good for you. Now, if yoga's not your bag, then you can do other types of things. It's interesting. A lot of the stretches that are out there that I experienced in my PE classes of old, well, they're actually all yoga poses. Now, I assume the yoga poses came first because they're super, super freaking old, but they had different types of things. We call them hurdler stretches in a few of my PE classes in my ancient days of running track. It's got a Sanskrit name in yoga, so I assume it came from that. But in any event, it is kind of a funny thing. And so there's lots of different opportunities for you to find your flexibility, whether it's yoga or stretching or something along those lines. But I would definitely recommend that as something. And it's something I'm going to be working on for the rest of this bicycle touring season. And because I think I'm going to be trying to bicycle through winter as well, through a variety of different methods, I'm hoping to keep it up through the year and into next year. So we'll talk a lot more about that. The other bit of cross training that I did this week was something that I thought I wasn't into anymore, and that's hiking. I had found that hiking for me was more pain than enjoyment. And we were told of this wonderful hike on the coast when we were going out to Cinque Terre. I'd mentioned this earlier on the show. There are 5 beautiful towns. You may have heard of them. They're very, very famous in around the world. They're kind of fishing villages. They're very touristy now. But going from a town that's not considered part of it, there's a beautiful long hike. It was about 4.5 miles, but up and over the mountains to the very first town. And you get this beautiful vista view. And you can check out in the show notes some of the pictures that I took, or if you were following along on Insta through the week that I was here, you saw them. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'd really like to do that, even though I kind of gotten away from hiking through the years. I found that I'd feel it in a variety of different tendons and ligaments, just didn't really work very well for me. So I thought, okay, let's give this a shot. I've done yoga. I've been good to myself. I've been biking all year. Let's try it out. And frankly, it felt really good. And I contrast it to today when all I did was walk around town with Kimberly because she wanted to do some shopping. It turned out I did some shopping. I found an old Nirvana vinyl album. Anyways, I couldn't find it in the States. It's all live stuff. Anyways, I digress. I felt way worse doing 3 hours of just walking around town. I felt, I don't know what the word, fatigued, and, my lower back was hurting and whatnot. I did a very strenuous hike up and down a mountain, 1,300 vertical feet of climbing, pretty high degree. I think it was rated as a strenuous hike, in the kind of hiking circles. I felt tired, but I felt great after that hike. And it felt like, okay, wait a second. There's another way to do some cross training. So I largely prefer getting my exercise by bicycle, but I do think there's some value in doing things that are not bicycling just to kind of keep the muscles limber in other ways. You're going to be using muscles in a different way. You're going to be using muscles that are not used during bicycling, and that can be helpful because it just sort of builds up your overall structure, and it can be very good for you. Again, I am not a doctor, nor am I do I have any kind of qualification. I'm just basically my basic knowledge of what I've read, and also just how I feel around these things. I think that I've been a little too focused on bicycling and would like to do some more things to help me be a better bicyclist and therefore a better bike tourer. The power and the stamina that I have on the bike, I think, will be enhanced by doing these things. So just something to think about with how you go about it. We've talked about training for a bicycle tour and, that there are a variety of different points of view. We talked about this in the beginner series. There's the, couch to bike tour method. There is the train really, really hard, do lots of hills and do all that kind of stuff, or somewhere in the middle. I think the area of the somewhere in the middle that I'm starting to occupy right now, as my philosophy is, biking shouldn't necessarily be the only thing you do, although it's fine, it's enough. But, if you want it to be a little bit more complete for a larger, healthy lifestyle, maybe mix in some stretching, some yoga, do some hiking, do some other things that can help build yourself up. One thing that I especially noticed in the yoga area, and this will be the last thing I talk about, I've been yammering on for a while here, is my upper body strength is very, very weak relative to my lower body strength. My lower body strength is in great shape because of all the bicycling. You don't do 720 miles on a bike between DC and Cincinnati and not develop some muscles. I'm here to tell you. But my upper body is weak. So as I've been starting to focus a little bit more on that, not really well, but at least paying attention to it as opposed to not, I'm starting to feel a little bit better about the relative imbalance in strength. I think I'll always be a lower body first person, but you know what? Maybe the upper body can come along for the ride a little bit. So that's my thoughts on cross training. I'm curious if other people do you disagree with me? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not you think cross training is a good idea or not. Also, if you do engage in some kind of cross training, what do you like to do? Do you like to hike? Do you like to do some other form of running? Do you like to, do you like to shop? I don't know. I don't like to shop. That hurt me more than anything else today. It was weird. I don't even know how to describe it. My back hurt after a while. It's weird. Walking around and standing around a lot. Apparently, that's the hardest form of exercise that I can possibly engage in, because the only thing this week that really got to me. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows, meetups, tour journals, you name it. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the whole small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Cody Forchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gephardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middleness, Connie Moore, William Goffman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Letoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, and new to the society, Tom Bills. And thanks also to all past and anonymous members for helping make the show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.